Punky Brewster. And who are you?
Remember when a little girl with mismatched sneakers and pigtails moved into an empty apartment and somehow made it feel like home? From 1984 to 1986 on NBC, and then in first-run syndication from 87 to 88, Punky Brewster followed Penelope, or Punky Brewster, who was a young girl abandoned by her mother at a Chicago shopping center who ends up taken in by Henry Warnemont, the grumpy but soft-hearted building manager who never planned on raising a kid. The series starred Soleil Moon Frye as Punky, George Gaynes as Henry, Cherie Johnson as her loyal best friend Cherie, and Amy Foster as the delightfully dramatic Margot. Now today we're going to count down 15 weird facts about Punky Brewster. And stick around for number 1, because when a national tragedy left millions of kids devastated, this little sitcom, it brought in a moonwalking legend to help them through it. But before we jump in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and show a little Punky power. It helps more retro TV fans like you find these deep dives. All right, now grab your sneakers and let us get into it. Number 15, Punky's bright mismatched shoes. Well, they had a dark origin. 2 different shoes, 2 different colors, and 0 apologies. Punky Brewster's mismatched sneakers became one of the most recognizable looks in 80s television. And most of us just thought it was quirky kid fashion. But it wasn't. It was survival. From the very first episode, the show laid it out. Punky's mother abandoned her and her dog Brandon at a Chicago shopping center. Punky ends up squatting in an empty apartment building, scavenging food, piecing together outfits from whatever she could find. The mismatched shoes weren't a style choice, they were what she had. In 1984, very few family sitcoms dared to center around a child that was abandoned in an empty apartment. While other shows handed kids mansions and housekeepers, Punky Brewster started with a rummage sale wardrobe and a Department of Children and Family Services case file. For a lot of young viewers, this was their first exposure to child homelessness, the foster care system, and the fear of being sent somewhere like Fenster Hall. The costume design was a quiet visual cue, a kid just making do, a child who couldn't afford to care about matching. The show even leaned into it with one of Punky's most famous lines, "I have 2 different feet. Why can't I wear 2 different shoes?" It sounded cute and it was defiant, but underneath, it was something much heavier. As the series progressed, the shoes evolved from a symbol of poverty into one of resilience and individuality. But in the beginning, they were a necessity dressed up in color so kids would handle the story being told. The brightest thing on 80s television was hiding one of its heaviest premises, and that's exactly why it worked. Number 14, the fridge episode was inspired by a real kid's idea. Now in 1985, NBC ran a contest asking children to submit story ideas for Punky Brewster. A 7-year-old named Jeremy Reams won. And in peak wholesome 80s fashion, he even appeared on camera at the beginning of the episode to introduce it.
Based on an idea submitted to us by Jeremy Reams, the winner of our Punky Brewster Story Contest.
Now, Jeremy's original idea was about kids learning CPR at school and using it to save an elderly person. It was sweet, it was educational, very after-school special energy. NBC looked at it and said, oh, what if, fridge? So instead of a classroom scenario, the producers cranked the stakes to 11. In the episode Cherie Lifesaver, Cherie crawls into an abandoned refrigerator in a vacant lot. The door slams and it latches. She can't breathe. Cue every 80s kid frozen in front of the TV, suddenly terrified of the kitchen. Refrigerators with mechanical latches had been banned since 1956, but older models were still rotting in alleyways and low-income neighborhoods throughout the 80s. The danger was pretty real. Or at least real enough that producers leaned into it, pretty hard too, and closed the episode with an on-screen reminder that CPR should only be performed by trained individuals. A primetime sitcom that turned itself into a public service announcement. And guess what? It worked. According to producers, at least one real life was saved because kids who watched the episode later performed CPR on an electrocuted man, Punky Brewster, saving lives in between commercial breaks. Number 13, NBC canceled the show, and then it refused to die. After 2 seasons on NBC, Punky Brewster got canceled in 1986. Not because kids stopped watching, Punky Power was everywhere. The problem was Sunday nights and 60 Minutes. So if you were alive in the 80s, you already know this. 60 Minutes was a ratings steamroller.
I'm Meredith Vieira. Those stories and Andy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes.
Punky's kid-heavy audience wouldn't compete with the adult demo advertisers wanted. And NBC, they cut the show loose. Normally, that's where the story ends. Except Columbia Pictures Television looked at the numbers and made an almost unheard of move. They revived the show in first-run syndication. New episodes sold directly to local stations across the country. Punky Brewster went from airing once a week to 5 days a week in many markets. Monday through Friday, parked right in the after-school time slot. To keep up with that schedule, the cast and crew, they went into overdrive. They produced 44 episodes in 2 years, nearly matching the entire NBC run's output. The tone shifted slightly, though, as Punky and her friends aged into preteens, less surviving alone in the apartment and more just surviving middle school. And the gamble paid off. The syndication run kept the show alive long enough to hit the magic episode count needed for endless reruns. That's why Punky Brewster felt like it was always on somewhere throughout the 90s. The move also quietly paved the way for other canceled shows to thrive outside the big three: Baywatch, Star Trek, The Next Generation. Those would all prove that syndication, it's not a graveyard. NBC canceled Punky, but Punky kept going on anyway. That's very on brand. Number 12, Soleil's rare medical condition changed her teen years. Now, behind the bright sneakers and punky power catchphrases, the kid who played America's favorite orphan was dealing with something that show writers couldn't have scripted.
So on with it.
Henry, I'm getting boobs.
As a teen, Soleil Moon Frye developed a rare medical condition called juvenile gigantomastia, which is a condition that causes rapid, extreme breast growth during puberty. By age 15, she stood 5'1" with a 38 double D chest. This wasn't cosmetic. It was painful, chronic back problems, difficulty breathing, constant physical discomfort, and the emotional toll hit even harder. The media didn't see a former child star dealing with a medical condition. They saw headlines. She was hypersexualized, objectified, and mocked. Just 15 years old, remember. She later described feeling like her body had become a prison, that people stopped seeing her as a person and only saw a shape. One year, she's America's plucky orphan in mismatched pigtails, and next, she's a teenager on magazine covers being reduced to anatomy. In 1992, at 15 years old, she underwent breast reduction surgery. It was such a high-profile moment that People magazine put her on the cover. But instead of retreating, Soleil eventually spoke openly about the experience and helped destigmatize breast reduction surgery for young women facing similar conditions. Years later, her 2021 Hulu documentary, Kid 90, revisited that era using her own home videos, offering an unfiltered look at growing up in Hollywood under a microscope. Number 11, Fred Gwynne walked out of his audition. Before George Gaynes became the grumpy, softy foster dad that we all grew up with, producers had their sights set on a very different TV legend, Fred Gwynne, Herman Munster himself. Gwynne had warmth, authority, and that towering physical presence. Producers saw him as the perfect fit for Henry Warnemont, a widowed Chicago bachelor who accidentally becomes a father figure to a kid in mismatched sneakers. But there was one problem. Gwynne had spent years clawing his way out from under green makeup and neck bolts. He wanted dramatic roles, anything that proved that he was more than just a lovable sitcom monster. So he shows up to audition, his hair's dyed, a sharp suit, ready to prove that he's a leading man. And then, young Soleil Moon Frye reportedly looked at him and asked, "Are you Herman Munster?" Gwynne, who had been fighting that exact sentence for 2 decades, reportedly replied, "Then let Herman leave the room," and walked out. Audition over. What? One innocent question from a kid and an entirely different version of Punky Brewster evaporated on the spot. George Gaynes stepped in, and he brought something completely different. Softer, drier, that slightly bewildered patience that made Henry feel like a real person fumbling through fatherhood instead of a towering sitcom personality that was trying to reinvent himself. Gwynne eventually got the dramatic respect that he had been chasing, especially as Judge Chamberlain Holler in My Cousin Vinny. But for one brief moment in the mid-'80s, Punky Brewster nearly had a Munster for a foster dad. Number 10, Soleil beat out 3,000 girls for the role. In 1984, NBC launched a nationwide casting search for Punky Brewster. They needed sass, but without the smugness. Tough without losing the tears. A little streetwise, a little fragile. Over 3,000 girls auditioned. 3,000. 7-year-old Frye walked in and made the whole thing feel pointless for everyone else. According to casting lore, she showed up in mismatched clothes and pigtails, already embodying the character before she said a single word.
If you want to know the truth, I'd rather have gotten hit.
NBC executives reportedly saw it instantly. The weird mix of vulnerability and spark that would define one of the most recognizable child star performances of the decade. And the runner-ups are where casting history gets fun. Before she was Clarissa explaining it all, before she was casting spells as Sabrina, a young Melissa Joan Hart auditioned for Punky and lost. The future teenage witch, well, she almost grew up in mismatched sneakers instead. She and Soleil later became lifelong friends, which feels like the universe is quietly apologizing with better timing. Another contender was Tiffany Brissett, who went on to play Vicky the Robot on Small Wonder. Imagine that alternate timeline. Punky as a malfunctioning android. In the 1980s, that probably would have lasted 4 seasons, though. Number 9, the failed spinoff that almost starred Dana Carvey. Now, at the end of season 1, NBC did what every 80s network did with a hit sitcom. They tried to squeeze another show out of it. A 2-part episode in April of 1985 introduced Fenster Hall, the orphanage where Punky briefly stayed before Henry adopted her. The setup was textbook backdoor pilot. New location, new ensemble of wayward boys, and a whole cast of characters that were ready to carry their own series. NBC was building a launch pad in plain sight. And here's where it gets interesting. Before The Church Lady, before Wayne's World, before Saturday Night Live turned him into a household name, Dana Carvey was reportedly the producer's top choice for a lead role in Fenster Hall. He declined to focus on stand-up comedy. Now, NBC ultimately passed on the series for fall of 1985, and the whole thing quietly evaporated before most fans even knew it existed. The pilot did feature some future familiar faces, though. A young Benji Gregory, who would later star in Alf, appeared, along with James LeGros as a street punk named Blade, because every 80s orphanage apparently required at least one kid named Blade, right? Well, the revival paid quiet homage to the failed experiment. Adult Cherie works at Fenster Hall, where she introduces Punky to her new foster daughter, Izzy. The orphanage that almost had its own series finally found its place in the story. 35 years late, but hey, that's still on time for a callback. Number 8, the cartoon added a magical gopher named Glomer. Now, while the live-action Punky Brewster was busy tackling abandonment and the Challenger disaster, NBC launched an animated spin-off in 1985 called It's Punky Brewster.
Gee, Punky, I thought Alan didn't want us to watch him play football. He'll change his mind when he sees what's in the basket.
And the cartoon took a hard left into just absolute madness. Enter Glomer, an orange kind of cat-like leprechaun gopher creature. I don't know. He's from a village at the end of the rainbow. And he could grant wishes, he could teleport kids around the world, and cause the kind of chaos that only 80s Saturday morning television could get away with. Now, those wishes almost always went just spectacularly wrong, which meant instead of very special episodes about life lessons, we got accidental trips to the moon, time travel mishaps, and international adventures powered by a rainbow rodent with impulse control problems. Now, here's what made it extra surreal. Nearly the entire live-action cast returned to voice their animated characters. So Soleil Moon Frye was still Punky, George Gaynes was still Henry. This wasn't some off-brand Saturday morning imitation. It was the real cast reacting to a magical gopher. Now, Glomer was voiced by Frank Welker, the legend behind Fred on Scooby-Doo and Megatron on the Transformers. The cartoon was produced by Ruby Spears, the studio behind Alvin and the Chipmunks, so the level of chaos, yeah, that's fully on brand. And the live-action show actually acknowledged it. In a 1987 episode, Punky has a dream sequence where she meets animated Glomer, a canonical crossover. The Punkyverse? Well, they officially recognized the gopher. Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of the boldest family sitcoms of the 80s, be sure to hit that like button. It tells YouTube that you want more nostalgia with a little bite, too. And drop a comment with your favorite Punky Brewster memory. All right, now back to the mismatched magic. Number 7, the NFL forced them to film mini episodes. In season 1, Punky Brewster aired on Sunday evenings, right after NFL games on NBC. And if you know anything about football, you know one thing. It never ends on time. Overtime, timeouts, reviews, commercials, more commercials. Suddenly your 30-minute sitcom is starting at 8:17 p.m. And every parent in America is staring at the clock during bedtime math. Now, NBC had a problem. Either kids miss half the episode because the game ran long, or they stay up past bedtime waiting for it to start. Both options meant angry 8-year-olds, and angry 8-year-olds, well, that meant ratings trouble. So the network did something almost unheard of in primetime television. During the 1984 and 1985 season, NBC produced 6 special 15-minute mini-episodes, actual scripted stories designed to plug into the schedule whenever football chaos shoved everything sideways. So if the NFL ran over, NBC could air a shorter episode so kids still got a complete beginning, middle, and end. A major network sitcom producing half-length episodes specifically to outmaneuver professional football, I mean, that hadn't really ever been done in primetime since the 1960s. Episodes like Visit to the Doctor and Go to Sleep were crafted for exactly this purpose. Later in syndication, they were often paired together to fill a standard half-hour block. And most fans never realized that they weren't originally meant to air that way. 2 mini episodes stitched together, passing as one. It was like a sitcom trench coat. The NFL was powerful enough to force a children's show to literally split itself in half. Punky Brewster adapted, aired anyway, and still held the audience. Mismatched sneakers? 1. Pro football? 0. Number 6, T.K. Carter's character was reworked after the spinoff failed. Now, when NBC passed on the Fenster Hall spinoff, it left T.K. Carter kind of in limbo. He'd been positioned to lead his own series as Mike Fulton, the chief counselor at the orphanage, an orphan himself who had grown up there and stayed to help kids walking the same path. That show was supposed to be his vehicle, but it evaporated overnight.
And this coat can go 6 months without water.
So instead of writing Carter off and pretending the whole thing never happened, producers did something smarter. They kept him and reimagined the character entirely. When season 2 rolled around, Mike Fulton, he wasn't running an orphanage anymore. He was Punky's 4th grade teacher. A new classroom, but same emotional core. And the move worked. Mike's backstory as an orphan gave him a connection to Punky that the other adults couldn't touch. He understood what it meant to grow up without parents. He guided her through some of the series' heaviest storylines and even got his own emotional arc when Punky helped them search for his birth mother. The spinoff, it flopped, but the character landed a better gig just down the hall. Number 5, the missing bra episode was a bit too controversial for cable. Of all the heavy topics that Punky Brewster tackled across its run, the one that actually got pulled from reruns involved a training bra. Episode 21 of Season 2, Girls Will Be Boys, had 2 storylines running side by side. On the surface, Punky joins an all-boys baseball team and gets bullied for it. Classic 80s girls can play too territory. But underneath the sporty plotline was something that the network hadn't quite prepared for: puberty. Now, in one subplot, Punky and Cherie go shopping for training bras. They talk openly about developing, about bodies changing, about growing up. Even during its original NBC run, executives were reportedly nervous about the dialogue. Then came syndication. When the show landed on the Family Channel, now known as Freeform, that episode quietly vanished from the rotation. The network deemed the discussion of breast development and bra shopping a little too mature for its family-friendly brand. The irony, though, it writes itself. Punky spends the entire episode proving that she doesn't have to hide being a girl to compete with boys. Meanwhile, cable television was literally hiding the part where she acknowledges being one. Fans found the censorship more awkward than the episode itself. Elastic straps, the thing that finally broke 90s cable executives, the priorities of network television, they've never, ever made less sense. Number 4, Punky was named after a real girl who appeared on the show. The name Punky Brewster sounds like something a writer's room cooked up after a little too much coffee, but it wasn't. It came from a real person. Back in prep school at the Lawrenceville School in New Jersey, future NBC president Brandon Tartikoff had a massive crush on this tomboy named Peyton, or Punky Brewster. Fast forward to the 80s, and Tartikoff is now running NBC. A new sitcom about a fiercely independent little girl with mismatched shoes and more attitude than most adults, well, it needs a name. He picks Punky Brewster, because of course he does. TV history shaped entirely by an adolescent infatuation. Now, once the show became a hit, the media tracked down the real Punky, now Peyton Brewster Rutledge, married with 3 kids. Instead of filing a lawsuit, she was reportedly thrilled. So thrilled, in fact, that she made a cameo. In the Season 2 episode, The Search, the real Punky Brewster appears as Miss Morton, a teacher at Punky's school. NBC even paid her a royalty fee since the show used her actual legal name. And the end credits included the line, "The producers gratefully acknowledge the cooperation of the real Punky Brewster." Number 3, the 2021 revival brought everyone back, briefly. In 2021, Peacock revived Punky Brewster, and for about 5 minutes, it felt like the mismatched sneakers were back for good. Soleil Moon Frye returned as adult Punky, now a divorced mom of 3, juggling kids, work, and the kind of chaos that doesn't get solved with a group hug in 22 minutes. Cherie Johnson came back as the lifelong best friend.
Be careful. That's where my best friend whacked me.
Even Amy Foster reprised Margot in a guest appearance. The band was finally getting back together. Freddie Prinze Jr. showed up as Travis, Punky's musician ex-husband. Not a villain, not a sitcom deadbeat, an amicable co-parent. Surprisingly grounded for a franchise that once had a magical gopher teleporting kids to the moon. Now, the show handled George Gaynes' absence with quiet class. Henry Warnemont wasn't recast or rewritten. His photo sat prominently in the house, and Punky often spoke to his memory. One of the more thoughtful revival choices in an era where reboots regularly forget what made the original work. Adult Punky was now a professional photographer, a nod to Henry, and the story came full circle when she began fostering a young girl named Izzy, mirroring her own origin. Warm fan reception, respectable reviews, plenty of goodwill. Then, Peacock canceled it after one 10-episode season. The show that survived NBC's cancellation in the 80s lasted exactly 1 season in the streaming era. Peacock pointed toward shifting priorities and adult-oriented projects like Bel Air as platforms recalibrated. Punky Brewster came back to remind everyone who she was and then slipped right back into rerun history. Holy macanoli. Number 2, Holy macanoli was a real family catchphrase. Now, if you grew up watching Punky Brewster, the phrase Holy macanoli is permanently lodged in your brain. Now, here's the twist. It wasn't crafted by a team of NBC comedy writers. It came straight from Soleil Moon Frye's actual family. The phrase was something that her mom and her siblings said at home, their goofy go-to reaction to surprise or just excitement. During auditions, producers noticed Soleil's natural energy and reportedly heard her use the phrase. So they did the smartest thing possible, kept it exactly as it was. They let a 7-year-old's living room vocabulary become television canon. Holy macanoli joined Punky Power as one of the show's verbal signatures, popping up episode after episode. It even carried over into the animated series, because apparently magical gophers also respect family catchphrases. Now for the revival, adult Punky and her kids, they kept the phrase alive. 3 decades later, and still getting mileage out of something that a kid brought from home on audition day. Number 1, the show tackled the Challenger disaster with Buzz Aldrin. On January 28th of 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded 73 seconds after liftoff. Millions of kids watched it happen live in their classrooms because teacher Krista McAuliffe was on board. 6 weeks later, Punky Brewster aired Accidents Happen. 6 weeks. In an era before social media or think pieces. This show looked at a national tragedy and said, we're handling this. The episode was written by series creator David W. Duclon, inspired by the very real reaction of star Soleil Moon Frye, who had been devastated by the disaster. Producers consulted psychologists to make sure that they got it right, carefully, not sensationally. Now, in the story, Punky becomes inconsolable and gives up her dream of becoming an astronaut because space suddenly feels terrifying instead of magical. And then Buzz Aldrin shows up. Apollo 11 walked on the moon, and now sitting in Punky Brewster's living room like it's the most normal thing in the world. He appears as himself to gently explain that exploration has always involved risk, and that bravery means moving forward even when you're scared. He even invites her to join the Young Astronauts program, which he was actually involved with in real life. This was intentional reassurance from someone who had literally seen Earth from space. Now, for a child sitcom, it was shockingly bold. The show that gave an entire generation refrigerator anxiety turned around and became one of the first pieces of television to help kids process shared grief. And there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about Punky Brewster. Which fact surprised you the most? Well, drop it in the comments and share this with a friend who deliberately tried wearing 2 different shoes at once. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Until next time, holy macanoli, this is Remember When.